Good evening. How are you?
Good.
Am I close enough you can hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Let me make this where I could read it. There we go. So we are here this evening to share with you our recommendation. Our hope is that the information that we're going to share this evening helps in explaining why we are bringing this recommendation to you and helps our stakeholders know that we have heard their concerns and that we have worked to address these concerns so that we can provide a safe and equitable learning and working environment for our students and staff. So an overview of the presentation that we're going to be giving to you tonight. First, we're going to review with you the guidance that we've received from the Department of Health, from the Department of Education, and the updated CDC guidance that came out last Friday. Then we want to share why the recommendation is being made. This is a question we've been asked. Why now? Why are you making this recommendation? And so that's a very valid question. And so we want to be able to provide an opportunity to address that. And then to share with you how we plan to address that through a multi-layered mitigation approach. And then we'll share with you the external checks, those who have reviewed our plan and have provided us their approval for the work that we are presenting to you tonight. As a reminder for you, this is our operational phase guide that was approved by the school board. We are currently in level 2 of phase 2, and the recommendation that we are making tonight is for you to move from level 2 of phase 3, to level 3 of phase 3. So a timeline, just as a reminder, and to make sure everybody is aware of the different things that we've been doing throughout this process. On February 2nd, Dr. Meyer shared with the board that he would be bringing forward this recommendation to you this evening. Since that time, we've been gathering feedback and suggestions through a variety of ways. We've been working with our principals. We've been gathering feedback and people's experiences through our open-ended thought exchange discussion. And then we've been meeting with a variety of advisory committees to discuss the mitigation strategies that could be put into place. We know that this has been a really hard time, and we know that it's been impacting our community as a whole. We've heard from our thought exchange that the biggest concerns from our teachers and our staff are how we would handle things like eating in the cafeteria, how we would handle having less than 6 feet of space in some situations in our classrooms and on our buses. It's important to know the things that our staff and our community members are concerned about, because that's the only way that we can address those concerns so that we make sure people feel safe as we're moving forward. So our recommendation for phase 3, level 3, this is what that would mean. This would mean that all-day attendance, 4 days per week, would begin on March 8th if approved. All students and their families would have the option to attend full-day in-person instruction. Wednesdays would continue to be at-home learning days for our students and planning days for our teachers. Remote and virtual instruction would continue to be offered. Attending half-day in-person and half-day remote would no longer be an option. We estimate at this time that about 69% of the students will be attending all day, and we'll share more data with you where we came up with that estimation as we move through the presentation. So the way that we made that determination is we looked at the total number of students right now who are attending in person at some time. We do understand that there will be some families who would change. We have families right now who are unable to send their students at all in person because they're unable to have their children or pick them up for the second half of the day. We also understand that there are some families who are sending their children because of the half day, and that those individuals may switch to a remote option if this were to be approved. So we feel like those numbers would, we're kind of balancing them on the outside, and so looking at those who have chosen at this point to do in-person instruction. So the chart before you shows you what we estimate those numbers to look like. We won't know exact numbers until we find out from our families what they would select. But what you can see is there's a very big range of numbers from our different schools, from the lowest being at Blacksburg High School to the highest being at Auburn Elementary. So what that means when you look at the chart for Blacksburg High School, which is our lowest, that means if every child who is currently in person at some point at this time decided to continue in person, we would have 53% of that student body population for in-person attendance. So on the other end, if you look at Auburn Elementary School, we would have up to 89% of our students for in-person attendance, again, based upon the number of individuals who are currently attending in person. I think it's important to note that this shows that we provided a variety of options that meet the needs of different communities. We have very different needs from school to school, and I think that the numbers here help us to see that we've been able to provide what is wanted in each of those communities and do hope to continue to be able to do so through the proposal that we present for you tonight. The graphic you're seeing here was provided to us. It's from the Virginia Department of Health and the VDOE K-12 guidance on reopening schools. As you're aware, the governor recently had a press release in which he stated that he wanted all schools to have some type of in-person learning by March 15th. We are, of course, in person, so we have met that goal, but this was the guidance that was given to school divisions, and it provides 5 steps. First is self-assessment of the implementation of mitigation strategies. Second is determining the level of school impact. Third is determining the level of community transmission. Fourth, understanding the needs of your community. And 5, determining which groups should attend in person and the timeline for phasing in additional groups. This graphic also comes from that same guidance document. And so this one's looking at the level of school impact. So transmission within the schools, 0 or sporadic cases with no evidence of transmission in schools. We will provide a more detailed breakdown regarding those numbers in just a little bit. Student absenteeism at a baseline or low, and our staff capacity, our ability to make sure that we have staff in our schools to support the needs of our students. This next graphic came out just on Friday, so I'm sure the community has noted, as well as the school board, that the presentation has changed based upon the guidelines that came out to us on Friday. And so we have worked diligently over the entire weekend and all day yesterday and today to try to update based upon the information that we were given. So one difference in the way that they have asked us to look at this data is they changed it from a 14-day range to a 7-day range. So that does make numbers a little bit different if you were looking at, a 7-day range as opposed to 14. So that was the initial change you would have seen in the data that came out. It is important to note the areas and where we are. We cannot ignore where we are within the areas of community transmission. So the stars here provide for you our data for Montgomery County. Shows that we are in the high transmission for the total number of new cases per 100,000 in the last 7 days, and that we are in substantial transmission in the orange for the percent of tests that are positive during the past 7 days. For our cumulative case count, this was updated as of today, so you can see that we have had some additional cases that have been reported in our school community this week. The green on this graphic is showing you our new cases, and the gray points out the prior positives in the schools. At this time, as of now, we do not have any community or school-related transmission that has been reflected on the data dashboard. They do not update it real time as we just did, so we can only provide to you what they have on. We know that we have announced a number of cases today in the Blacksburg community. They are continuing to work on contact tracing. The Virginia Department of Health has not notified us that they have indicated that there is a school outbreak that will be noted on this dashboard and that they have found the connections occurred in the school setting. Again, they are still in the process of that contact tracing, and so we will update that information. We need to look at our ability to maintain adequate staffing as well. If you can remember, back in December, we were not able to maintain adequate staffing. And so we came to the board and asked that we move back within our phase and level so that we could ensure that we were able to adequately staff, which is something that we will need to continue to do throughout the remainder of the school year, regardless of the phase that we are in. Staff vaccinations are well underway. They will be completed prior to March 8th. February 24th is the last date of scheduled vaccinations for our school staff. So the CDC guidance that came out Friday was a lot to read through. I think it's important to know that there were a variety of documents that we were given, and you had to look around to find different pieces. So the three main documents that I'll be referencing tonight for you, one is called the Operating Schools document. That was started September and provided to schools after we had been in school session, and then was updated February. So this is a document that has continued to change throughout time from the CDC. There's also a document that's called the transition document. And so what that is, a document that's saying, well, we gave you this guidance in September, and now we're giving you this guidance now, and you guys have been working in schools and having students in between. What do you do to transfer from what we gave you before to what we gave you now? And so we're going to provide you some guidance from that document as well. And then there was a toolkit that was given to school divisions to utilize in planning. We cannot ignore the guidance from the CDC, which speaks to the utilization of community transmission rate charts and 6-foot distancing whenever possible. We feel confident that the multi-layer mitigation plan that has been developed in conjunction with the local health department, utilizing feedback from teachers, administrators, and expert in airborne transmission of virus, multiple advisory groups, provides a safe and equitable in-person learning environment for our students, while simultaneously providing a remote learning option for families as well. So I will read these to you, and I'm sorry to just read, but I think this is something that we should do at this time. So this is again from the guidance that was released on the 12th, and this specific reference is from the document I shared that kind of tells us how to transition from the old guidance to the new guidance. And it states schools that are open in person instructionally, either fully open or hybrid, may decide to remain open even at high or red levels of community transmission. These decisions should be guided by information on school-specific factors such as mitigation strategies implemented, local needs, stakeholder input, the number of cases among students, teachers and staff, and school experience. A decision to remain open should involve considerations for further strengthening mitigation strategies and continuing to monitor cases to reassess decisions. This should be driven by a classroom-first approach. In-person instruction should be prioritized over extracurricular activities, including sports and school events. A common source of school transmission to minimize the risk of transmission in schools and promote in-person learning. Just this morning, Dr. Lane, the superintendent of instruction, spoke with Dr. Meyer and other superintendents to verify that they had reached out to the CDC to ask if the expectation was that school divisions move backwards if they were already in person. And they were told this same information that's available to you through this document, that the expectation is not for divisions to move backwards. When you see the piece here that speaks to experience, that was a really strong part, which is saying if you have experience in doing mitigation and if you have seen that your mitigation in the school is working, that is a very strong factor which the local board should consider. The second quote is from the document that I told you gets updated. It got updated from September to now. And it says the many benefits of in-person schooling should be weighed against the risks of spreading COVID-19 in the school and the community. Working with states, tribes, localities, and territories, schools can weigh the level of community transmission and their capacity to implement appropriate mitigation measures in schools to protect students, teachers, administrators, and other staff. The transition document states, K-12 schools should be the last settings to close after all other mitigation measures in the community have been employed, and the first to reopen when they can do so safely. Given the likely association between levels of community transmission of SARS-CoV-2 and risk of SARS-CoV-2 exposure in schools, a first step in determining when and how to reopen safely involves assessing the level of community transmission. School administrators working with local public health officials should assess the level of risk of the community and the likelihood of the cases in a school facility, the likelihood that a case would lead to an outbreak, and the consequences of in-school transmission. We know that it has been really hard. It has been a hard 11 months for our schools and for our community as a whole. It's taken all of us, and it takes a community commitment. I think this piece speaks very strongly to the need that we have for our local community to also be ensuring that we are doing out of schools the type of things that we are doing in schools so that we can limit the exposure and the transmissions that are occurring in the community. Additional guidance that we received regarding physical distance and barriers. We have heard a lot of concerns about this, a lot of questions. You know, if the CDC guidance is strongly stating 6 foot minimum for social distancing, why would we make a recommendation for there to be any less in any areas? And that's a very valid question. And so we want to reiterate that layered mitigation is the goal of our plan, that we do have experience to show that we have been able to successfully have students. When you all allowed a vote for students who were identified through our SAP process, who are at greater need to attend school, there were some places where students began being less than 6 feet apart because of the level of need of those students, and we implemented layered mitigation. On our buses, we have utilized layered mitigation, and we have not seen transmission in those areas. So the evidence suggests that K-12 schools that have strictly implemented mitigation strategies have been able to safely open for in-person instruction and remain open. The interventions presented in this section provide examples of ways to promote physical distancing and alternatives when physical distancing is not possible. Shields or other physical barriers are installed to separate office staff and visitors when distancing of at least 6 feet apart is difficult. The last is a question that was in the mitigation checklist. So the question asked, are physical barriers installed in areas where distancing at least 6 feet apart is not possible for staff and students, such as training, practice, or competition? And it says, to install cleanable shields or other barriers to separate coaching staff, trainers, students when distancing of at least 6 feet apart is not an option. Additional information we're provided is about public health efforts that help to support getting kids back to school safely. So the following public health efforts provide additional layers of COVID-19 prevention in school. Testing to identify individuals with SARS-CoV-2 infection to limit transmission and outbreaks. Vaccination for teachers and school staff and in communities as soon as the supply allows. Teachers and school staff hold jobs critical to the continued functioning of our society and are at a potential occupational risk of exposure. Officials should consider giving high priority to teachers in Phase 1B. We are fortunate in our health district that teachers were included in Phase 1B. This is not the case across the rest of our state, or certainly not our nation as well. As I shared earlier, all staff who elected to have a vaccination have been given that opportunity, and we will be finished with that shortly. Vaccinating teachers and school staff can be considered one layer of mitigation and protection for staff and students. Strategies that minimize barriers to access vaccination for teachers and other frontline essential workers, such as vaccine clinics or closing the place of work, are optional. We were able to do that as well. As you know, we are having some modified schedules in order to ensure that all our staff are able to get their vaccinations. Another piece of information that the CDC guidance speaks to is health equity considerations. They say the absence of in-person educational options may disadvantage children from low-resource communities which may include large representations of racial and ethnic minority groups, English language and English learners, and students with disabilities. Plans for safe delivery of in-person instruction in K-12 schools must consider efforts to promote fair access to healthy educational environments for students and staff. We are all in this together, but we are not all affected in the same way. Our teachers and our staff have risen to the expectations. Our families are doing the best that they can, but our students are not impacted in the same ways. Some of our families can stay home with their students and are able to provide additional resources, and some of our families are not able to. So the very fair question, why are we asking for this now? Why not wait? And that is a great question. The reason is our students. Our students are our why. They are the reason that we are bringing this recommendation to you. Our students are falling behind. They are being impacted socially and emotionally and academically. Returning to in-person learning with approved mitigation would immediately begin to decrease the negative impact on our students. In terms of instructional time, you can see the increase in in-person instruction that would be provided for our elementary school students. As you know, these students are attending in person for half of a day, and then they are doing extended learning activities at home. This would allow for a significant increase in the in-personal time and would reduce the amount of out-of-school independent work. We have seen disparity in the amount of the outside work that is being able to be turned in and being completed by our families. And we have heard from many families about the difficulty of getting this work completed after they've been working a full day. Our secondary students, we're looking here at semesters as opposed to a school day. So for our students in secondary, the blue line here shows you the total number of in-person instructional hours from the beginning of the school year until now. The red shows you the total number of instructional hours in person that our students would have if we started on March 8th to the end of the school year. You can see that we would be providing more time in the last section of the school year of in-person than we did during the whole beginning of the school year. While students are logging in many cases, our attendance, we're getting students online from home. We have heard from many teachers about the difficulty of engaging students online and about their difficulty in receiving some of the assignments, many of the assignments that are due. Our teachers have worked diligently to reach out to students, and parents are providing additional resources, but it is difficult for many of our students to be successful from home. We also talk about the impact, and I think it's important when we look at grades to not just think about them as grades. A lot of time grades make us feel a certain way about ourselves. And so when our students are receiving D's and F's, they are getting the letter grade, but they also feel that grade assigned to them as a person. So it's important that we look at this. We have been working diligently. We have been trying to reach out to our families, but you can see significant increases in the number of D's and F's that our students have received. The secondary level, you can see this impact is significant as well. Relationships are key to teaching. Being with your students and building those relationships in person is often cited as one of the most important things that our educators have. And they have not had the time that they typically would to build those relationships, which encourage students and build them up. It doesn't mean they're not doing their best to do that remotely. It's just very different. The data presented to you here is our MAP student growth data. MAP is a nationally normed test that is given to students across the country. The diamond that you see here represents the growth that we would expect to see in an average year. Now, we know it's not an average year, but it is important to be mindful of this. So the blue shows you last year where our students performed in regards to that national norm expectation, and the red shows you where our students are this year. This was for mathematics. And the next data is for reading. I do think it's important that we note in this assessment, you see that our 6th, 7th, and 8th grade students look like they have gone backwards. Some students may have been taking this assessment that was given at home. They may have not given it the attention perhaps that they would have had they been in school learning environment. So I think it's important that we do note that this assessment was given differently than it has been in past years. This is the additional data for our students in language and writing. You can see across all of these that we are not performing where we would have been had we had a regular year. PALS is a statewide assessment that's given to our elementary kids. And so you can see here, these are the number of students that are identified below benchmark. And so when you're looking at this, you can see these are kids who we say they really need extra intervention. And this is how we target who we pull into extra reading and get extra supports for our students. In terms of elementary retentions, we try very, very hard not to retain any elementary students. It is, or any students, but it is very difficult to recover from a retention. The data shows that students who are retained are less likely to graduate from high school. So when we look at the data for this year, 112 summer school letters were sent out to elementary parents with report cards. And to say we are trying to reach out, what can we do to help? Are there additional resources that we can provide for you? At this time, the projected number of students that would be retained is 45. Again, we try very hard not to do this. However, these students who we are saying within that number are significantly behind or are turning in no work. While the academic is extremely important for us to focus on, we cannot forget the impact on our students' social and emotional well-being, which is very difficult to measure. So we just want to share a couple of points from you, from our own data, and then from our stakeholders that we've worked with, as well as some national data. We have seen a decrease in the number of threat assessments. Threat assessments are completed when it is noted that a student is in danger. Typically, this is a threat of self-harm. We have seen 6 times less threat assessments as a school division this year. That means we are not catching things that are occurring because our adults are not seeing the students to report this information. Beginning in April of 2020, the proportion of children's mental health related ER visits among all pediatric ER visits has increased. So they're looking at April to October. Between 5 and 11-year-olds, it increased 24%. And with students 12 to 17-year-olds, there was a 31% increase. And that's national data. We've spoken directly with our local Department of Social Services. They share with us that reports of child abuse in Montgomery County have decreased between 20 and 25 cases per month. School staff are the #1 reporters of child abuse and neglect. DSS recognizes and is concerned that there are children whose abuse and neglect is not being addressed because they are not being seen as often by the local school community. They've also shared with us an increase in serious mental health and domestic violence occurrences. The data you see in front of you here is from the Mental Health America report. Is a nonprofit organization, and this data is based on online screening. This data does reflect people of all age groups, so it is not specific to student populations. But you can see the significant increase. The green line shows 2020 data. And so this data reflects individuals who have reported suicidal ideation. That means they are thinking about committing suicide. The next data shares with you a report on responses by students, by youth. And so this is based upon 1.5 million online mental health screeners completed. What that means is students have gone themselves to the internet to seek a screener that will help them identify if they are having or experiencing mental health concerns. This is a 93% increase from previous years. Please note that students 11 to 17 years old are now the largest group of respondents completing mental health online screeners. We've been asked a very important question, which is, can we keep our students and our staff safe? We feel that we have shown that we can do that, and that if we continue to do the things we've been doing, and we add additional layered mitigation as being recommended, that we can continue to do so. The information provided for you here shows those areas around us who are either now full day in person or provide full day in person options to their schools or have already approved to move forward with that. All other districts in our health district are currently either at that level or have approved for that level within their school division. I do believe the answer to that question, can we do that? The answer to that is yes, we can, because we have dedicated students and staff who have proven that we are able to do this. Next, we're going to share with you what that additional mitigation looks like, what instruction in our schools would be, how we would handle operations and safety within the mitigation plan to move to phase 3, level 3.
Returning to the regular schedule of 9:15 to 3:45. When possible, teachers would be given the choice of delivering remote, in-person, or hybrid instruction. And when possible, students would be kept with the current teacher. Due to co-teaching and class size limitations, some teachers may be assigned to remote, in-person, or hybrid. Some children may have to change teachers based on the choices made by their schools and their grade levels at the school, or the choice of the instructional model would determine that need to move teachers. Specialties would return to 45 minutes, which gives our classroom teachers planning time. Children would have recess twice with recess aides, which again gives more planning time for our classroom teachers. Recess aides then would be able to help clean the equipment between our recess groups. We would continue to follow our Wednesday check-in procedure with learning at home on Wednesday. And dismissal procedures would vary by schools depending upon the layout of the school. For example, staggered dismissals to reduce traffic flow in the hallways. Instruction in class and remote instruction would include access to both whole and small group instruction with opportunities for differentiation. In-class and remote instruction would include opportunities for independent work, and remote students could leave Google Meet to complete their independent work. That means full-day instruction would remove the need for the current extended learning activities except for Wednesdays. Here you see a sample elementary schedule for 6.5 hours, and we've heard concerns from our parents and from our teachers about screen time for our elementary students. And we discussed this at our recent Elementary Advisory Committee meeting. As you know, a good portion of elementary instruction is in small group where we differentiate instruction. And you know, upon visiting classrooms, many times you see teachers sitting with a small group and the other children are either working independently or working with their peers. The purpose of this slide is to show you some possible times when children could be able to disconnect from Google Meet with their teacher depending upon the lesson. As you can see, there are multiple times throughout the day when remote students would not be working synchronously with their teacher, again, depending upon the lesson. So outside of lunch and recess, there are times throughout the instructional day in which they could disconnect from Google Meet, but then rejoin the teacher because the teacher would likely be working with a small group of children. He or she would still be available to the children. So again, you can see here, it's approximately 3 hours of disconnect time from Google Meet with the teacher. Mr. Pauley?
Thank you, Dr. Wickham. I've been asked to review with you what secondary schedules and instruction would look like in Phase 3, Level 3 as we've proposed. It's very similar to what Dr. Wickham spoke of for elementary, in that we would also return to full-day schedules for all students, including remote and in-person students, on a 4-day week, continuing to meet with students in person Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays. We would return to our 8:05 to 2:50 original schedules back in the normal schedules. We would continue also to have the Wednesday check-in procedure that would provide asynchronous learning days for students and planning time for teachers. We do have an established protocol in secondary for students who switch between remote and in-person. In the ideal, students would make a decision to be remote or in-person and stick with that, but we certainly want to provide for opportunities for when families need to make a change in that, and we have that protocol. Dr. Wickham mentioned screen time. This has been something that when we first envisioned what remote learning might look like back at last summer, the Secondary Advisory Committee brought this up numerous times, the concern that extended periods of screen time are not good for people. And so we built into our plan already that students would have breaks. They would also have breaks, as she mentioned earlier. Secondary students would have breaks. They would be able to disconnect during their lunch break, and IE time, which in total is around 80 minutes in the middle of the day. And also during instruction, when direct instruction is concluded and there are opportunities for small group work or independent work, teachers would be able to instruct students who are remote to disconnect for that period of time and either reconnect at an established time during that class period or reconnect the following day. But they would receive breaks from screen time if they choose the fully remote option. Teachers would return to the regular planning time. That would be 2 planning periods for middle school teachers or 1 planning period for high school teachers, but the total would be the same, somewhere between 70 and 80 minutes. And also we would stagger lunch and IE times, as I'll show you when we look at the sample schedules. We will stagger lunch and IE times and also stagger dismissal times and times dismissal from classrooms, but also dismissal at the end of the day, just to keep the numbers of students in the hallways to a minimum. Instructionally, secondary teachers have been doing hybrid teaching all year, so that would continue for those teachers each period in which they have both in-person and remote students. It is certainly possible that there could be a period or two where a teacher doesn't have any remote students, but in periods where they would have both in-person and remote, they would continue with the hybrid teaching that they have been doing all year. Remote students would be expected to attend their classes on a schedule, on the exact same schedule, and receive their instruction synchronously. And as I mentioned earlier, they would be able to disconnect from Google Meet to do independent or small group work as the teacher directs. And then just noted at the bottom that there would be no change to schedules or instruction for our students who are enrolled in the full-time virtual school program. Do I change it to the next? Which arrow? Oh, somebody, I didn't touch it. Okay, here we go. There we go. So there are some sample middle school schedules, and I want to make sure that we note these are sample middle school schedules. Each school would have some nuances to this, but just for you all to look at in considering this transition to the next phase and level. We could continue with the 7-period day with 40-minute classes and leaving an 80-minute chunk of time in the middle of the day, depending on how schools would structure this. But the idea would be that during this part of the day, students are released in smaller groups to pick up their lunches. Perhaps they would do that by grade level or by wing, or we'd leave that up to the schools. But we would leave that time in the middle of the day for remote students to disconnect, but also for the in-person students to stagger their lunch pickup and receive intervention as they would need it. It is possible that we could talk with the middle school principals and they with their staff and determine that a schedule like the one on the right could possibly be used. Continue to meet with only 4 classes per day, but for a longer period of time on an alternating schedule. So Monday, meet with periods 1, 2, 3, and 4, and on Tuesday, 5, 6, 7, 8, and repeat that again on Thursday and Friday. So that is a possibility. And again, noted on the right, just about how we would provide those breaks from screen time. Our high schools are all on some type of semester block schedule, and so theirs is a bit easier to conceive. They would have continue with a 4-block day. As you know, we have some schools that have a 5-period day with some different arrangements of courses. Some have AB blocks, some have semester block, but in general, this is what our high schools look like. And they would return to this schedule, shorten them from 90 minutes just to a little bit less, 80 minutes or 75 for some, as I've shown. And again, leave that large chunk of time in the middle of the day, 80 minutes, to stagger those lunches and provide intervention time as needed. And again, noting the same thing as previously, that our remote students would have time to disconnect and have a break from screen time. I believe Dr. Walker is next.
Good evening. I'm here to discuss what support would look like for students with disabilities as they transition to the new proposed phase. School-based IEP teams will meet with parents and guardians to amend student IEPs to reflect the division's instructional phase and its impact on academic and related service needs. We'll be increasing with academic time as well as related services time, so we have to adjust the services page of each and every IEP for each student. This takes a lot of time to do, an enormous amount of time because of the scheduling. We have to schedule with parents. Also, we have to work around instruction to schedule the IP meetings, and we have to schedule with teachers, both special ed and gen ed, and administrators, because regulation requires that we have a full IEP team for each student IEP meeting. Also, transportation department will notify parents of students who receive transportation in relation to their IEP, and also tell them of the pickup and the drop-off times. School-based administration will ensure that student schedules are aligned with their IEPs as written. All students with disabilities who require one-to-one targeted support will be covered with their assigned special education instructional assistant. And students with disabilities who have chosen to participate in remote instruction will continue to be supported by special education teachers and their assigned instructional assistant. The department will utilize progress monitoring tools to determine the progress on IEP goals. This will be a focus on reading and math for students with disabilities. Also, to provide targeted instruction on individual areas of needs that are identified. Continue progress monitoring and adjust instructional programming as needed. Continue to utilize best practices such as co-planning, co-teaching, and co-assessing, as well as best practices with differentiational instruction within the classroom. Additional technical support will be provided by the special education administrative team, and the department will continue to collaborate with curriculum and instruction and student services to ensure all areas of student needs are addressed. That concludes special education. So next up is mitigation. I think it's Mr. Garrison.
Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the board. Appreciate your time and attention tonight as we discuss this proposal. In regards to mitigation, we have, as you saw in some earlier slides, discussed with a large number of groups and various advisory teams, various aspects of the proposal, had conversations about their concerns and seek to try to address some of these comments and questions directly in terms of mitigation. In our classrooms, once again, we plan to maintain physical distancing as much as possible. Our goal, of course, is 3 to 6 feet. That's recommended through VDOE, the American Pediatric Association, the World Health Organization. Again, in any place that we can maintain 6 feet, that would be our goal. But as we have seen from various school systems across the state of Virginia, And actually, most school systems around the world, 3 feet has been a working number in many, many places in regards to schools with other mitigation in place. You'll see we continue a lot of the original mitigation this board approved back when we first wrote our opening plan back in June and July. Face masks will continue to be required at all times for staff and students. We will have the plexi dividers or face shields available and required whenever 3 feet of distancing cannot be maintained. You see a picture of that example up in the top right corner. We have had some situations throughout the year, particularly in small groups in elementary, like you see there, where that's been needed and has been required and used all school year long. You can see those students are obviously closer than 3 feet, but they're with their teacher and they all have masks and the face shields. Based on teacher feedback, we're going to try to not use those white bordered desk dividers because they obstructed the view. In some classrooms, it impacted the line of sight. We'll have a slide that shows a picture of those later. But we're going to use the dividers that are seen in the bottom right-hand corner, where you can see it's all clear plastic, no dividers, or no borders, I'm sorry. And of course, again, you can see that all students and their teacher are wearing their masks. Our teachers have the option to determine that they can use those desk dividers or face shields within their classroom, even when 6 feet of distancing can be maintained. So that's an option that's available, just like we let teachers set up their classrooms in various arrangements in any other year. They have some options here as to what mitigation strategies could be in place to suit their individual classroom. Our students are able to request a face shield or a plexi desk divider in addition to their mask. All of our students will be issued a face shield under this plan that they can have for class changes or times in the classroom. Also at our secondary level, this would be an upgrade to mitigation at this point. At every secondary desk, grades 6 through 12, we'll have some disinfecting wipes available so students can go ahead and disinfect their desk if they like. They can also go ahead and do that with other class materials, including their Chromebook. Also in the classroom, each of our classrooms will be provided an individual air filtration unit. This is an additional piece of mitigation that goes along with this recommendation. You see a picture of the individual unit there on the right. We're also going to continue to run our school HVAC units to allow the maximum amount of air circulation per hour. Mr. Krantz will be up soon after me. I'm going to let him speak to the specifics of air filtration. He's our expert. Of course, we'll continue that our larger spaces will be provided to our larger classrooms or classes. For example, that band class, that choir class, we may still need to have those classes in an auditorium or in the cafeteria so that they have the space they need. Our custodians, of course, will continue to clean all those high-touch areas throughout the day. They'll, of course, clean the entire building each evening, and they still have the opportunity for the deep clean each Wednesday. We do have a number of specialty plans out there that have been approved throughout the year for classes such as PE, choir, band. All of those would have to be revisited and make sure that we have the right mitigation in place to suit this plan as we did back in the fall. Our principals, of course, continue to play a big part. We heard in a number of our focus groups individual concerns about specific buildings, older buildings, smaller buildings. You saw the different types of numbers that could be possible under this plan, 50-some% in person, up to 89, I think, percent in person. So we understand that our principals are going to play a key part in helping us to put together the individual specific plan that suits their school. They continue to be able to request support from facilities to troubleshoot any concerns and request any supplies. Additionally, our teachers are able to request supplies directly if they find they need other items in their classrooms. Meals. Meals was a significant concern shared with us by basically every advisory group, and it makes sense, right? The mask has to come off to eat. So we share on this first slide just The American Academy of Pediatrics recommendations, we chose this group because they offered the most specific recommendations. They talk about using maximum physical distancing. They speak to cohorting students, particularly within a classroom, rather than mixing everyone in the cafeteria. They talk about separate lunch periods to minimize students in the cafeteria at one time if you have to go that route, and to use all those underused and underutilized spaces for lunchtime, not just the cafeteria. They encourage you to eat outdoors whenever you can. And of course, they encourage adults and students to wash their hands or use sanitizer before or after lunch, always a good practice. So that's recommended by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Our plan speaks to many portions of these recommendations and even then some. We do support that all available spaces need to be available for meal services, and we will maintain that 6 foot of physical distancing whenever masks have to come off to eat. That may mean that I may be a classroom teacher and I may have cut into that 6 foot distance during class time, but when it comes time to eat, some of those students will need to go elsewhere so we can get back to 6 foot when the masks come off to eat. Additionally, we'll use the desk dividers during meals inside to provide what's called direct transmission suppression, right? Not exactly the same as a mask, but again, direct transmission suppression when the mask has to come off in order to be able to eat. We'll encourage our students to eat those meals within 15 minutes. I can tell you as a former principal, we've got some longer lunch shifts, but a lot of that time is spent in lunch line and picking out the items you want, and then the social pieces that come. I do believe most of our students, when they focus on eating, can eat in 15 minutes. As soon as they're finished, we're going to ask them to put their mask back on. We're going to arrange those spaces so that no students are face-to-face at meal times. So there's no kind of booth-type seating where we're right across from each other. And we're also going to encourage that if our students are going to socialize and talk a little bit during that lunchtime, it's after they finish eating, and it's when the masks go back on. You see a picture there on the right. Once again, we plan to use those desk dividers that were less than ideal for classroom instruction for lunch. The border doesn't seem to matter when it's time to eat. Of course, we'll need all of our school faculty and staff to help provide supervision during those meal times as we spread students out throughout the building. We need supervision in every one of those spaces. And with that being said, we've got a number of lunch aides who have been working other roles during the first part of the school year. They've been working in our child care situations. They'll come back to their home elementary schools to support lunch. Continuing with the meal plan, we also plan to not offer any a la carte items or self-serve items. These are prepackaged meals. So we don't have a lot of the choices that we usually have during our typical school year, so we don't have all that time in line or all that time around food that's going to go to whoever chooses it. We're going to have an opportunity for parents to choose to eat outside for their child. You know, I can say, if that's my belief, if that's what I need for my student or what I feel is best for my student, I can request that my child would eat their meals outside. To support that, we're going to use the tents that are pictured there on the right. These are 20 by 40 tents that would be used for outdoor eating areas. A number of these tents would be made available to each school based upon the size of their need. And that, of course, is just a stock photo. In actuality, we would have more than one side up to allow better air ventilation inside the tent. Of course, teachers will always have the opportunity or the option to take their class outside for meals. And of course, that's very much weather dependent. That's also an opportunity we already offer to most teachers during the typical school year. You got a pretty day, you can take the class out to eat if you'd like. Of course, principals, again, are going to have to help us with that schedule to help create meal distribution plans that allow us to not overcrowd spaces, whether that is a staggered shift of students down to pick up their meal or whether that's a delivery to the classroom. Again, that's a school site decision based upon the needs and the arrangement of the school. They'll help us with that, of course, for breakfast, lunch, and snack time at the elementaries. And again, we'll add the air purifiers in any area where lunch is eaten. Again, Mr. Krantz will speak more to that. Hallway traffic. This was another area that was shared with us as a major concern, particularly at the secondary level when you change classes. And now we're all out there moving to our next place. During class changes, we'll expect that our students and staff out in the hall will wear both the cloth face covering and the shield while they're in the hallways during those class changes. Students will continue to be encouraged to move directly to and from their locations. That's not a time that they're going to be able to visit and hang out. To help with that, we're going to continue to not issue our lockers as a place to go back to or check my stuff or hang out with a buddy. But we also know that means we're probably going to need to allow them to carry backpacks. Some schools had some various guidelines about that, but under the current situation, we would allow students to carry their backpack. And of course, as I think Mr. Pauly mentioned, bus releases will be staggered at the end of each day so that we don't have everybody headed to the bus exit at the exact same time. Elementary recess. One of the most exciting pieces I got to share in some of my groups. Elementary recess gets to return under this plan. Students will again have the morning and the afternoon recess breaks, as Dr. Wickham described to you, and I think as the board approved last year. I think last year was the first year we had 2 recesses a day. Those recess aides who have been working in childcare get to return back to their home schools, so we get that additional support at the school building. We will ask that those students be required to wear those masks, just like outdoor PE. Students will have that opportunity to use hand sanitizer before and after their recess. We've done a lot of work. I should say Mr. Krantz and his team has done a lot of work on cleaning the playground equipment. And even throughout this, the end of last week, the beginning of this week, we've enhanced that from being cleaned once a day to now being able to be cleaned after each use. Each shift of recess gets the playground equipment cleaned. Again, principals are going to have to help us create that schedule so that they avoid overcrowding their play spaces, work their schedule so that we don't have everybody out there at the same time. And again, we've got a few schools that actually even have multiple play areas that they'll be able to make use of. And I believe that is my last slide. And I believe Mr. Krantz is next.
Good evening. Buses, we'll continue to ask parents to drive their students to school if they're not riding the bus today. As we're doing today, masks are required by both our drivers and our students. We maintain a supply of masks on the buses, and in the event that a child comes on board without a mask, we do provide them with a mask. When we analyzed our routes, so we have 90 routes in the morning between secondary and elementary, 90 routes in the afternoon between elementary and secondary. We found that 15 of the 180 routes would have a situation where there would be more students on the bus than we would have the number of seats if there was one student per child, one student per seat, not counting siblings, because siblings can sit together. In order to address that situation, you would have 2 students sit together that would be required to have their mask and a shield. So now, in addition to masks that we maintain in our supply box, we also would have face shields sitting in our supply box. The bus drivers will assign seats to our students. That way they'll know where groupings of 2 would be, and they could easily check and make sure people were sitting where they were supposed to be. And transportation, in the case where we do need 2 students to sit together that are not siblings, they'll coordinate with the parents and make sure that the parents are comfortable that Tommy is sitting with Mark, or that there's a relationship and they're comfortable with that. We will continue to keep windows open on our buses as well as our emergency. We keep one emergency hatch open for ventilation purposes, which is probably the biggest thing that we can do on our bus. We've looked on our buses at putting in automatic ventilation, similar to what we do with our HVAC systems. However, those are dictated by the state. When we've talked to the state where we would have to place those devices at, they don't work. They're at such a low point, we can't get any real value by having those kind of devices on our buses. We'll continue to maintain hand sanitizer on our buses as we do today in the supply cabinet. And in addition to spraying as we do now between each run and then wiping down at the end of the day, we'll spray between our secondary elementary, then wipe and clean at the end of the morning, spray between elementary in the afternoon, secondary in the afternoon and elementary, and then we'll spray and wipe down in the evening time. Air filtration. So this is probably the biggest thing that we can do to ensure our buildings have their highest protection level. We've actually had some consultation with an expert in the airborne transmission of viruses, because no one person knows all of this. And while we've done a lot of reading, we maintain a lot, we wanted to get some verification we were on the right track. We have prior put in individual air filtration systems in individual rooms that were needed. We now are moving forward and will have in place before March 1st air filtration systems in each individual classroom. Those systems are actually certified as HEPA H13, which is at a level from a filtering standpoint higher than any of the MERV systems we have. MERV 15, which the MERV system is on your larger HVAC systems, is the recommended standard. We actually have 5 schools either has MERV 14 or actually MERV 15. The HEPA 13 filter for us allows us in an 840 square foot room, we're circulating air twice per hour. That particular HEP filter reduces the concentrations of the virus to the aerosol sizes, removes the aerosols, it removes the allergens and pollutants or decreases it. It removes 99.9% of particles down to 0.1 microns. And it's recommended to change the filters twice a year. We're actually changing them every 3 months. So we're doing it 4 times a year versus twice. Our school-wide units, what we're doing there is we're making certain that we're bringing fresh air in. We have energy management systems in all of our buildings but one. Those systems are set to generally maximize the reduction of your expenditure from a cash standpoint. What we've done is increased it. We want more fresh air coming in. So we're bringing more fresh in and opening it earlier in the morning time and extending it in the evening time so that we have a good circulation that's taking place. The filters for those units are done in accordance with the manufacturer's recommendations. We have what's called School Dude, a preventive maintenance system. We record all of our filter changes in that system, and then it tells us when the next change needs to take place. We're not trying to do it by memory. We're actually doing it by our computer system. The other thing that we're doing is monitoring our CO2 levels. So we monitor from a facility standpoint 3 things: the temperatures in the room and the humidity level and the CO2. That indicates to us, are the units operating as they're supposed to? And that's something that the expert said that they were very impressed that we were doing the things, not necessarily we're 100% perfect, because you're never going to be. But we were doing the things to make sure we were being as safe as we possibly could. The things that have taken place with this is all mitigation that y'all have seen tonight has been presented by the New River Health, has been approved by the New River Health District. The mitigation is in line with guidance from the American Academy of Pediatrics. The mitigation you've seen is in line with the guidance from the Virginia Department of Education regarding school reopening. It's referenced in the Center for Disease Control guidance. The things you saw in the air filtration is also supported by the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, are called ASHRA. The Montgomery County Department of Social Services we're in compliance with. And as we've mentioned, we've consulted with an expert in the airborne transmission of viruses. With that, I think it's you, Dr. Meyer.
Yes. So thanks to our administrative team for putting this plan together and the countless hours you all have done so. Just want to let you know that tomorrow we'll be distributing a questionnaire to the MCPS community regarding their level of support for this proposal. It will go to parents, teachers, students, and community members, and we'll have that data for you by our next meeting. So, Ms. Graham?